I do appreciate the chance to do this. You'll see enormous synergy between this. Although we frame this particular Zoom as the intersection between positive deviance and leading cause of life, what we already see in this small group is that that's not the name of the actual movement that's happening. The movement, perhaps like theology, has many, many names. So if you had a social network map, it would have the name of probably hundreds of social movements that we think would all work a little better if they were informed by the flipping of positive deviance and the underpinning of a philosophy of leading cause of life. So we've asked some Saha from the Wellbeing in the Nation Network, Craig Steward in Cape Town, the Warehouse Trust, and Bobby Milstein of Rethink Health and the Ripple Foundation. The idea here is we're sort of listening in to a conversation about how their work might actually illuminate the leading causes of life and the positive deviance approach, and how these approaches may well be informed by what they understand about our collective work with the world.
So much of this is about less about how things are separate and more about how life feeds and informs each other, how we're connected. Some of our biggest opportunities is in recognizing that actually, if we trust in life and recognize that there may be systems of inequity that are preventing some of that life from getting out, and that if we were to work together to remove some of those systems that come from legacies of racism and other forms where we believed we needed to be separate from one another or hold things to ourselves to have life, that life for ourselves or our people came at a cost to that of others, and we were willing to tolerate that cost. If we abandon that belief to believe that working together to release those legacies and build new legacies of life where we give life to one another and release that potential, that we're more abundant together. And in this moment in time, it seems so important not only to socially connect with one another around the globe, even if in the context of physical distancing, but to connect the dots between what we need for all the things we need to have life, to truly thrive. That isn't just found within our hospital walls, that those are critical, but also what we need in terms of food, in terms of kindness, in terms of community, and in terms of that ability to get together over chai and gossip and to belong to one another. And I think if we can't approach this in a connected way, we may well stop or mitigate the impact of lives lost without mitigating the impact of hope and the other dimensions of life lost. And I think on the flip side, we have an opportunity to truly show the connection amongst ourselves and amongst the vital conditions that create life.
Yeah, well, so I can certainly pick up on that in that, I guess the first thing I'll say about movements and where leading causes of life and positive deviance can be seen as at work are really in each of the frontiers where our life feels like it's in flux or contested or endangered, but also, carried within that jeopardy is the possibility of real expansion, of real flourishing. And there's these sort of very strange and difficult to hold contradictions in the moment of, so much it seems improbable, like the impossible is actually happening, to bring an entire economy to the halt. And yet that demonstrates that so much is possible. And we see this whether we look through a lens of health or reimagining capitalism or ways of looking at environmental sustainability, democracy. These are some of the different areas of innovation. I spent a long time in my career working at the Centers for Disease Control. I'm proud for a lot of the work we do, but also consistently frustrated at an ethos that felt very inhumane and technocratic at many times, putting science in the foreground and almost eclipsing issues of consciousness and conscience. The main publication that CDC puts out is the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. which I always saw as sort of the lifestyles of the dead and dying. What could we learn by publishing weekly the lifestyles of the dead and dying? And I had sort of from that point on tried to find the humanity that we could bring in the foreground, the interdependence that we could bring into the foreground, and the productive aspects of not only what are we trying to prevent and control, but what are we trying to create? And that has led straight line to what Shoma said as being, articulating the vital conditions that we depend on and recognizing that it is we feeling some sense of belonging and civic muscle that actually create those conditions and are responsible for who has them and who doesn't. And what are we doing to expand those vital conditions for everyone? And if not, to what degree are we in some ways complicit in the harm that we're all feeling? And so I'll stop there and we'll move on to other thinkers here.
Greetings to everybody. Lovely to be greeting you from Cape Town, South Africa. We Warehouse work primarily within sort of faith and congregational communities around South Africa, and particularly within the Cape Town metro, and then alongside civil society. And one of the things that's particularly interested me in the kind of leading causes of life notions is around connectivity and generativity, and how we find those connection points that aren't otherwise visible, and the sort of informal networks that exist, and how you nurture life in those. If you looked at a forest and said, what do we need to nurture life here? You wouldn't be saying, look after the fungus. And yet the fungus turns out to be critical to this system stewardship. And so what is the fungus in a network? And so a lot of our work has been, when you look at a system or a city or a country, where are those fungal networks that exist? That how do you work within those networks to create bonded moments of friendship, of connection, of relationship, but also where the life in our lives that sometimes is hidden is given an opportunity to surface. The sort of yearning for more, the yearning for what could be, a banding opportunity to bring people of that like life together, to be talking and finding each other, not across institutional coherence necessarily, but building relational connections, and then moving into beginning to build some form of institutional coherence around that, and then creating connection. The last part is bridging, creating connections with that life to other bits of life in other parts of the world and cities. A couple of years ago, we were running out of water in the city of Cape Town. We were but days away from running out of water. And a couple of years before that, we were facing student uprisings all over the country, and what was called Fees Must Fall. And what those years have created is effectively in WhatsApp groups, but these networks of friends who share a desire for life, who when these moments happen find each other quite quickly and start talking about how they can work together in those spaces. That has led to hundreds of peace and justice monitors operating initially in a student uprising context, and now as cities try and implement homelessness solutions or settlements or healthcare, those networks are emerging to take care of that. They're not an organization, they're not named, but present there in the existence of life. They've nurtured the emergence of disaster relief initiatives in the face of large-scale informal settlement fires. And so I'm particularly interested in this fungus network, this network of mushrooms that connect all the big trees, that bring the life between them, that teach the learning up and down, that has tremendous capacity, I think, to nurture life in systems.
One problem of the language of leading cause of life is that it's a little bit too sermonic. It's a little bit too inspirational. It's too easy to be, and it's not intended to be language of metaphor. It's actually intended to be more accurate. So when you describe fungal networks, it's not a metaphor. You're not using that as a metaphor. You're trying to accurately describe how the hell things actually work. That's actually the deep link with positive deviance, which is very inspirational. But the whole work of positive deviance is to look in a different way at the data, so it's more accurate. It helps us see what we have to work with.
You see that all the things we've been talking about, the resilience of communities, the assets of those who are quote unquote marginalized, etc., those are what come forward as the great blessings we have. The fungus and the network of, it's just such a different way of thinking about connecting. And I think our ability to translate these ideas into measures that better reflect life, so that we can have measures of life, so that we're not just talking about the lifestyles of the dead and dying, and the language to go with that is just so inspiring.
I want to invite Carla Alvarado.
Thank you so much, Gary. And yes, there are a lot of things that we do out of rote repetition and just arbitrariness that can be addressed and readdressed through this framework of positive deviance and the leading causes of life. You cannot unsee it. It's a practice. It takes intentionality. And you are trying to solve a problem to tackle it right then and there, not to keep pondering about it and say that more studies are needed to understand this, right? And that's what I loved about the research that I read on positive deviance, is that it did not conclude with more research is needed. We found a solution. The people in these very kind of monolithic and strict institutions are also trying to break that mold. And that sadly sometimes that is not fostered and it's not rewarded. And then people find more creative ways of carrying out their talents and lending them to the community. Now that we know that we can do a lot more with a lot less, and that it takes will and intentionality, that let those be guided through the perspective of positive deviance. You know, you can be a bit subversive with positive things too, but if someone won't take their medicine, you just got to put a little sugar on it. So
we know you can do it.